Today's Bible study comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verses 24 through 29, and it reads as follows. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. In verse 24, it starts off, it says, Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine, everyone who hears these words of mine, and puts them into practice. You got to do something when you hear them. You got to put them into practice. You are like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And then it says, when the rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against the house. This is opposition. This is things that tear down your spiritual body. Sins, transgressions, things of that nature. Trials and tribulations that you go through. But since you are built on that rock, it says, yet it did not fall. You did not fall because you're built on that rock. And it tells you right after, it says, because it's had its foundation on the rock. You are solid because you are on the rock, and the rock is Jesus Christ. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice, everyone that hears them but does not do it is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Wow. Sand, granular, you can pick it up, it'll go through your fingers, kick it a little bit, it'll move. So, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. First of all, if we're speaking of natural, you know that the rain is going to move that sand. The streams are going to move that sand. Even when wind blows, it will move that sand. And beat against the house, and the house fell with a great crash. In these two sections here, verses 24 through 27, it's speaking of the opposition when it speaks of the rain, the stream, the winds, and the beating against the house. But then it's also telling you one way you can be rewarded. If you hear the word and you do the word, you will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And when all these problems came, you didn't fall. You stayed strong. You stayed on your foundation. But the ones who hear it and don't do it, well, they get punished. But they get punished because of themselves. See, in the first part, you get rewarded because you stood on Jesus. You stayed strong. But the ones who hear it and don't do anything, well, this is a self-inflicting punishment to them because they had the chance to stand strong if they would have built their house on the rock, but they didn't. It said they built it on sand. So the rain came down, the stream came down, the winds blew and beat against the house. The opposition got you, and you fell. You fell for it, and you crashed. With the great crash, that means you didn't get rewarded. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching. Of course they were, because he spoke with authority and knowledge. And then in the next verse, as a matter of fact, it says, because he taught as one who had authority and not as the teachers of the law. Now let's delve into these just a little bit more. I like delving into things. If you look at Matthew 28:20, it says, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So Jesus' word is going to judge men. Jesus' word is going to judge men. And it's going to be there at the end. Jesus' word will not die out. It will not fade away. It will be there at the end to judgment. And if you look at it, you know that it's going to be there, because the reason that you can be judged is because Jesus has laid his word out for you to read, to study, and to do. If you do it, the wise man, and build your foundation on the rock, you will stand the test. You will stand the conflicts. Woo! Hebrews 2:3 says, how will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? After it was at the first spoken through the Lord, it was confirmed through to us by those who heard. We heard it. We are speaking about hearing the word. We should learn that our only true strength is with Christ. Okay? The apostles were commissioned by the Lord. Moses, Isaiah, Nehemiah, Jeremiah, all of them did great things. But none of their word was higher than Christ. None of them knew more than Christ. What I'm saying, none of them could go beyond the word of Christ. And when the Lord gives you his word, they speak of it. He gave it to them. He knows of it thoroughly. Now, the other thing is, rains, floods, wind, like I said, they're just opposition. Above, beneath, and all around you. You notice you got something below you, something in front of you, and something above you. Well, that's how you get attacked. From above, front of you, above you. Something is going to be there. And all around you. This stuff is all around you. The stability of the Wiseman house is due to the fact that it was built upon the rock. And when I say the rock, that's Jesus. That's why I said the rock. The life we live should be built on Jesus. Now, this is once again the same thing in verse 26, except an opposite result, because you don't listen. And everyone that heareth these words of mine and doeth them not, doesn't listen, doesn't do them, shall be likened unto a foolish man who built his house upon the sand, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and smote upon the house, and it fell, and great was the fall thereof. So in this case, the opposition came, and it beat the brakes off of you. And the opposition will always beat you if you don't have Christ. And the final days, you will have a huge crash. So don't let 25 and 26 really show you the reciprocal of what happens. If you do what it says or if you don't. They're opposites. I should say they're opposites, because one tells you if you do right, yes. If you do wrong, no. And this is going to happen. If you don't have the true rock, which is the words or teachings of God, this is the problem that you're going to have. You're going to fall. Because there are so many oppositions out in this world to get you. This world ain't made for you. It's made to get you. So, skipping to verse 28, and it came to pass when Jesus finished these things, these words, the multitudes were astonished at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not their scribes. Well, Jesus is, how can I say it? His authority was greater than the scribes. It was greater than Moses. It was greater than even the scriptures that they had at that time. And there is no earthly and human authority that surpasses Christ. This was the simple fact that they understood who was speaking to them and the authority that came with his conversation. So they realized that he was the Messiah. Amen.